For the first time in her life, the forthcoming birthday party did not please Nancy. It turned out to be an unfortunate event that should just be endured with clenched teeth. She wasn't in the mood for fun in the slightest. In the last year, her life had not been going well. Family problems, confusion with work, difficulties with her daughter, and, most importantly, a heavy premonition of impending trouble. Not so long ago, Nancy was sure that she was happy, that everything was fine, just fine, that she had everything that a young woman of her age could only dream of. Now she tried to remember when, at what point in her life things had gone wrong. Tried and couldn't. Nancy. Russia. Typed around the huge shopping center, looking without much interest at the windows of fashion boutiques with mannequins displayed there. Charles told her to buy herself an evening dress. I hope you're not going to have guests on your own birthday, dressed in whatever the hell Nancy asked, with a squeamish curl of her lips. It started to hurt a little. She didn't wear a damn thing. She just preferred comfortable clothes, not dresses and high stilettos, but spacious and flying skirts, sundresses, jeans, and colorful white t-shirts with sneakers. Understand, Nancy, you are not 16 years old anymore. Charles reprimanded her angrily. What are you doing, acting like a teenager? It's time you got over that feeling. God, I'm ashamed of you sometimes. All my colleagues and business partners have wives in elegant suits or evening gowns. And you, listening to all this, Nancy, involuntarily lived it and covered herself with her hands over her shoulders, as if trying to protect herself, to ward off the offensive words. But in the back of her mind, a tiny germ of doubt was beginning to grow. Maybe Charles was right. Maybe it really wasn't right. And yet it was already 30 years. Or rather, tomorrow it would be 30 on the occasion of her birthday. And Charles had organized a big reception in the house, where all the cream of society had been invited. Frankly speaking, Nancy herself would prefer to celebrate quietly, without too much fuss, noise, and pathos, only with the closest people, a couple of best friends, my daughter, and her husband, of course. But she knew what Charles would say if she dared to tell him what she wanted. You're at it again. Stop fooling around on sur my. Nancy, it's about time you grew up. How she hated the way she was addressed. Nancy. Her parents called her Nancy or Nancy. Her friends jokingly called her Nancy. Nancy had a kind of bureaucratic coldness about her. So? It just so happened that at the moment, Nancy was wandering between the rows of clothes racks, trying to choose a suitable outfit and wishing with all her soul that she could cancel her birthday party tomorrow. But even canceling the party was out of her hands. Charles was in charge of the whole organization. In the last year, he had quietly taken the reins of their family into his own hands, controlling and subordinating his wife and daughter in literally everything. Remembered often, Nancy saw in her husband's eyes when he looked at her a poorly concealed irritation and carefully disguised annoyance. He regarded her as some hideous caterpillar that could inspire nothing but disgust. And it would be well to destroy it as soon as possible. But once it had been different, there had been a different kind of feeling and emotion in his eyes when he looked at Nancy. There was tenderness and warmth and admiration and adoration and love. Let's look in this boutique, she heard Charles's voice and shuddered with surprise. Had her husband also come to the mall to help her choose an outfit? He hadn't called her father in a long, long time, and his voice hadn't been this gentle in many months. Nancy felt a salty lump in her throat and smiled through her tears of relief. What a fool she had been. She'd been imagining it all their imaginary and non-existent family problems. In fact, there were no problems at all. Her husband was still crazy about her. Here, I even put all my business aside to come to the mall and help her pick out the right dress. But wait, how did he guess that this was where she was going? All these thoughts ran through her head, literally, in a matter of seconds. Nancy looked back with a smile to ask her husband how he had found her. But barely had she turned around, The smile slowly slid off her face. First of all, Charles was not alone. In the second place, with him was a woman, a gorgeous blonde with appetizing forms. Breasts, butt, waist all in place. Her lush hips were pulled back by a tight pencil skirt, and her white lace blouse lightened her breasts so seductively that they looked just out of place. And Nancy might even have mistaken this gorgeous blonde for her husband's secretary or personal assistant if it weren't for what was in thirds. And in the third, Charles was hugging this girl not at all as a colleague or subordinate, or even as a mere acquaintance. No, his hand was resting loosely on her thigh. And it was to her, to this girl and not to Nancy at all, that Charles addressed the word call. Nancy froze in place as if frozen in place. Her first impulse was to run away cowardly, so as not to embarrass people. Charles had clearly not counted on, and could not have anticipated the fact that he was now being watched. But by a tremendous effort of will, she forced herself to stop. Why should she run? She was doing nothing wrong or reprehensible. But her own lawful husband is at the moment shamelessly pawing some blonde in full view of everyone. Charles and this flamboyant girl were acting like lovers. There could not be the slightest doubt about that. In a kind of stupor, Nancy watched her husband's palm slip around the blonde's built waist as his lips leaned to her dainty, neat ear and whispered playfully. Nancy did not recognize her own husband. She hadn't seen him like this in 1,000 years. But the biggest shock to her was when Charles pulled his companion in the direction of the bridal boutique. Was this some kind of stupid, unfortunate joke? Nancy thought, refusing to find any logical explanation for what was happening. Maybe there would be laughter, and a camera crew would pop out of the corner of the street and shout, "Smile! It's a prank! You've been filmed by a hidden camera?" But no one jumped out without realizing what they were doing. Saint-Cyr stealthily joined the happy couple and followed them into the wedding parlor. A young saleswoman, a consultant, immediately rushed to them. "Good afternoon. Can I help you?" Charles patted his companion's thigh in a friendly manner. "We're looking for a wedding dress. A luxurious, beautiful, the most stunning wedding dress that will be able to at least minimally shade and emphasize the magnificent beauty of this girl," he said with a smile. "Well, Syria, skin is capricious," pouted his lips. Pretending to be embarrassed. "What are you driving me into the paint?" Oh, you're in luck." And the counselor was happy. "Just the day before, we received a new collection of wedding dresses from Paris. Luxurious and simply gorgeous dresses. Paris. Our excellent Blomba and immediately turned to find her husband demanding league. Charles, I want to see them all. Desire, ladies, is the law." He smiled gallantly. "Then we'll see them all, no matter how long it takes." Nancy hid behind a rack of men's tuxedos and watched the couple surreptitiously. She didn't understand anything. She just refused to understand. If two people were acting like lovers while choosing wedding dresses, what could that mean? Only one thing. They're going to get married soon. Logical, but also completely illogical. How the hell can they plan a wedding if Charles is married to Nancy? The girl counselor, with a playful smile, asked the couple, "And when is the happy event planned?" The blonde looked questioningly at Charles, as if giving him the opportunity to answer. "I guess very, very soon," he said, and stroked his blonde bestia's hand. In a month at the most, Nancy was dumbfounded, finally losing his ability to think and reason clearly. The wedding's in a month. What the hell was he talking about? How can he marry that white rat when he already has a legitimate wife? Nancy. Finally, laden with a pile of snow white and greasy lace, the blonde rattled into the fitting stall. "Don't go far." Flirtatiously, she wagged her finger at her found husband. "I'll show myself to you in every new dress." Awe and anticipation. In a tone of voice, the latter responded. In order not to attract unnecessary attention to herself, Nancy grabbed from the nearest hanger the first cream-colored dress that came across, and Yurkova went into the adjacent fitting room. No one could see her there, but she could hear everything perfectly. She pulled the curtain behind her and listened avidly. What are these lovebirds stealing among themselves about? Siraj, again capricious, stretched out the blonde. When will you finally behave with your mom? I'm tired of waiting. Nancy almost shrieked. We'll be talking about her soon, baby, Charles lazily retorted. Pretty soon I'd just have to nail her down a little, push her a little harder, and then she'd take out a deed of gift on the house and then re-register her company in my name. Then I'd have my hands full. And if she doesn't want to? Capricious, the blonde stretched out. Not to give you the company, not to give you a divorce. It's not like she's stupid. Although, of course, but not that much. Who's going to ask her? Poked Charles skeptically. Don't worry, I have my own leverage on her. Waving silently, Nancy, not believing her ears and eyes, shook her head. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Okay, so Charles had been hatching a devious plan for months now to take her property away from her and kick her ass like a lousy dog. She was hurting, literally physically hurting from betrayal, from disappointment, and from fear. It seemed her husband was very determined, and if she were to make a big deal about the gift and the transfer of the company, not to mention the divorce, what would that do to her? What would he be willing to do? It seemed to her that it wasn't Charles speaking now, but some horrible stranger, as if she, her real husband, had been abducted by aliens and replaced by an android-like human being. Well, look, Charles, the blonde said playfully, my patience is not unlimited either. I will not wait long. Do you know how many fans I have, dreaming to be in your place? So I have a lot of choices. Why are you wearing gold? Charles sounded scared and worried. How can you say that? I love you. I can't live without you. Wait just a little longer. I'm getting along, I promise you. You don't have long to wait, do you? In spite of the nastiness of the situation, Nancy laughed, though bitterly. But how could he beg, plead, ingratiate, kiss hands? With her, with his own wife, he behaved quite differently. He didn't ask, he demanded, he gave orders, he didn't admire, he criticized. He was constantly dissatisfied, making Nancy involuntarily fold under his penetrating gaze. And here you look at him, he's just a tame, fluffy cat. What do you think? Asked the blonde, meanwhile, probably showing Charles the wedding gowns. Lovely, just lovely. You look amazing. My joy is a real goddess, a Miss World beauty queen. Nancy was even nauseated by the abundance of this pathos in pink. I think a little in the hips stretched out the goddess anxiously. I'm a different example right now. It looked like the process risked dragging on for a very long time. Nancy sighed and glanced at the dress she had brought with her to the stall for diversion. Maybe she should try it on, since she'd brought it anyway. Besides, she still hadn't gotten anything for her birthday. She'd finished her birthday lip. Her husband had told her to buy herself a birthday outfit, organized a party for her, but why? God, why? What is he getting into all this for if he intends to divorce her soon? What kind of game is he playing? And most importantly, what should she do now, given the new circumstances? To make Charles a scandal? And say that in the divorce he will get nothing, neither the house, nor the company, nor the found money. Or, on the contrary, to hide and pretend she knew nothing. Nancy suddenly realized that her whole life had been turned upside down. Whatever decision she made now, nothing would ever be the same again. She didn't remember how long she'd been sitting so soon, peering at her peak in the fitting booth, clutching the crumpled dress she'd never tried on. She couldn't even hear what Charles and his mistress were saying anymore. It was as if all her senses had shut down. She didn't realize whether they were here or gone. A nervous shiver was beating her, and Nancy habitually wrapped her arms around her shoulders, trying to calm and warm herself. She finally came to her senses after the excited voice of the counselor, girl, and the woman outside the curtain. "Woman, are you feeling ill? Did you fall asleep in there or something? Should we call a doctor? I'm pulling through the screen right now. And if you're not dressed, mind you, it's not my fault." Nancy cooks hoarsely, not recognizing her own voice. "I'm fine, thank you. I'm on my way out." Pulling back the curtains, she stepped out of the dressing room on reluctant feet and slowly wandered toward the cash register. Charles and his companion were no longer in the salon. "Are you going to take this dress?" the girl asked suspiciously, looking at the crumpled piece of cream cloth in Nancy's hands. Perhaps she was afraid that the customer had ruined an expensive branded item and would now leave it in the store and walk away. Nancy nodded slowly, even though she had no idea if the dress would fit her or not. She didn't have the energy to go shopping and pick out another one. She would take this one and be done with it. After all, she absolutely didn't care how she looked right now. "Yes, I'll buy that dress," she said, quietly. Nancy had no memory of paying, of leaving the mall, of driving to daycare to pick up her daughter. In her head, she echoed overhearing the dialogue between her husband and his mistress. When he finally divorced his mom. "I'm tired of waiting. Soon, baby. Soon. All I have to do is push her a little bit harder." I had to bite my lip to keep from crying. My daughter mustn't have noticed she was upset. The little girl was always very worried if she saw her mother sad. Mommy?" 6-year-old Molly ran out to her from the group. She's visibly drooping on one leg. "Mommy James teased me again today." Nancy frowned. "Oh, that James." No, of course not. She understood. He was a child and could hardly realize how much his words could hurt. But at least his parents could explain to him that it wasn't good to ridicule people for their physical flaws. Little Kathy was a foundering, lingering pain. How many tears she had cried! How many sleepless nights she had spent! One leg of her daughter from birth was shorter than the other by several centimeters. When the girl began to walk independently, they tried to solve this problem with walls and special orthopedic shoes. But still, Kromova was too obvious. Of course, this defect could be corrected surgically. But doctors did not recommend surgery until the baby is not at least 7 years old. All the same, the process of stretching the limbs was not easy and quite painful. The daughter's literacy was the main reason that Charles began to gradually drift away from his wife. He blamed it all on Nancy. He said it was her fault that the child was born handicapped. "I come from a healthy family." "It's not my genes, that's for sure," he whispered angrily, looking at Molly, who was still limping, almost squeamishly. "Actually, in our family too, everyone was healthy." Nancy tried to object quietly. But Charles continued to stare at her accusingly, as if in court. "So you didn't behave properly during your pregnancy? Maybe you didn't eat or move properly, didn't take your vitamins, and generally didn't care about your health. That's the result." Nancy tried to swallow that resentment as well. "Look, Charles," she said, still softly. "You know very well that I've been following all the doctor's recommendations. I've been on time for all my checkups. I've had all my tests. I've had all my ultrasounds. And I've taken everything I've been prescribed. You can't just blame me like that." "Yes, I can." "The husband was being rude. You're the mother, you carried her, and you gave birth to her. It's on you. It's your fault the baby was born disabled. After all, it's only shortened."
Nancy's foot tried to get through to him. "In all other respects, we have a perfectly fine, intelligent, healthy little girl. And you talk about Molly like she's some kind of a misfit. She can barely get over the bitter lump in her throat." "She is not complete," Charles spat in her face, making her stagger. "She's not like all the other kids. Like normal kids, she immediately stands out in the crowd because she has a limp."
She can't play normal children's games, hide and seek, catch up, Cossack bandits. And when she grows up, guys won't ask her to dance. Because who wants to dance with a clumsy cripple who's about to knock you down? Shut up. Nancy couldn't take it anymore. Don't you talk about her like that? She's your daughter. Have you no shame? I, my dear, am not ashamed at all, Charles shouted. You should be ashamed of yourself for having borne me a sick child. One that would be inconvenient to take out in high society. Not to the theater, not to a concert, not to any social gathering. What's inconvenient about it? That she's only limping. It's not just a cold, Charles retorted. It is a physical flaw of ugliness that is immediately conspicuous. Unable to listen to these angry, cruel words any longer, Nancy gave birth and rushed out of the room, locking herself in the bathroom. She appeared in a contented manner, giving vent to her grief. How could he talk like that about his daughter, his own kind? Human, ugly, inferior, deficient. Since then, Charles has been completely withdrawn from his daughter's upbringing. He preferred not to notice her at all. If sometimes his glance accidentally stopped on the all-girl, it always expressed the same squeamish pity and contempt. It was intolerable to Nancy to see her own father push his only daughter away from him. Molly was still very young and did not yet understand much, but she couldn't help but feel that her father treated her differently than her mother did. It was obvious. Gradually, the little girl herself got used to staying out of sight. She already realized that the less often he saw her, the less he grumbled and scolded. Nancy tried to compensate her daughter for the lack of paternal love. She surrounded her with double care and attention. They practiced special physical therapy, regularly went to electric therapy, swimming and massage. And yet deep down Nancy realized that all these procedures
Did not help her daughter at all. There are no miracles, especially when it comes to medicine. The only thing left to do was to grit her teeth and endure, waiting for the girl to grow up a little. At 7 years old,
She could have the surgery. And then... What would happen then? Nancy superstitious. I didn't wish, for fear of jinxing it. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to completely shield Molly from a curious and not always toxic world. She and her daughter were constantly met with leering stares when they walked in the park. Other children often refused to let Molly play with them because they saw her struggling to run and jump on the same level as everyone else. In addition, many asked hurtful questions. Why are you limping? Do your legs have different lengths? When it came time to send Molly to kindergarten, Nancy decided on a private one, with very good reviews. She didn't think her daughter would be treated with prejudice or pity. She talked to the teacher, and the teacher, in her turn, had a rather sensitive conversation with the children, explaining that in no case should you ridicule a person if he or she has any health problems.
I think we've got it all figured out. Except that James was not a tolerable bully. He now and then tried to tease Molly, call her a temple leg, and show her tongue. But mostly children and educators treated the girl well. And still Nancy realized that her daughter in most cases would look like a white crow in the group. During the preparation for holiday matinees, she never took part in voicing new dances, did not drive round dances with everyone around the Christmas tree, did not participate in the walls while her classmates showed proud and happy parents everything that they had learned. Molly sat modestly off to the side in Nancy's high chair, her throat constricted with an agonizing spasm as she watched her kidney. Soon, however, the girl discovered several other talents, though she did not excel in dancing or sports, but she sang beautifully. She had absolute hearing and a wonderful gentle voice, reminiscent of the ringing of crystal or silver bells. And Molly also perfectly drew, sculpted, told poems. In short, her mother had much to be proud of, but when she tried timidly to tell Charles about their daughter's successes, he only tiredly waved away, not wanting to know anything. What talents? To him, Molly was incomplete. Period. Nancy was still afraid to return home. Not knowing how she could look her husband in the eye and pretend that she knew nothing, she decided not to reveal her cards to him yet and pretend that they were aware that he had a mistress whom he was going to marry in the very near future. Nancy needed to buy time to think carefully about how to proceed. Charles had a plan to take away the house and company she had inherited from her parents. Well, would she make him believe that she suspected nothing? And then what? We'll see. Do you want ice cream at the cafe? Made fun? Asked Nancy to her daughter. She clapped her hands with joy. Yay, yay, I want ice cream, of course I do. Nancy opened the car door and helped her daughter into the child's seat, then buckled the seatbelts. At that moment, she suddenly heard a man's voice calling her name. At first, Nancy shrank back and pulled her head into her shoulders, thinking it was Charles. But immediately she realized that the voice was not his. Strange, unfamiliar. Turning around, she saw a tall, broad-shouldered man walking from the garden gate toward their car, leading a boy by the hand. Nancy looked closely and recognized the boy as the James, who had always called Molly names. It's James, his dad confirmed to his daughter. Oh my. Nancy was surprised. It was rare to see dads in this private kindergarten. Usually mothers, grandmothers, or nannies came to pick up the children. Dads, on the other hand, were terribly busy at their super important and super prestigious jobs. Crossing her arms over her chest, she stood silently waiting for the father and son to approach. From the looks of it, James' father wasn't too shabby either. An expensive suit, a watch of a famous brand, fancy shoes on his wrist? Surely this praised handsome man was no ordinary office plankton. I just wonder what he wanted from her. It's a good thing you didn't leave. Father James smiled. I wanted to talk to you. About what? Nancy asked cautiously. About my son's behavior? That's it, she said uncertainly, still not sure what he was getting at. Well, yes. The teacher informed me that James had been, shall we say, indiscreet with your daughter today. A blush of embarrassment and awkwardness burned her cheeks. And, by the way, not for the first time, she added angrily, deciding to let it go and say what she'd been saying for a long time. James would like to apologize, the man said hurriedly. What? Nancy was confused. He would like to apologize to Molly, if possible. Well, Nancy shrugged uncertainly, then nodded toward the car. Let him ask if he wants to. And I don't mind. James released his father's broad, firm palm and hesitantly approached Molly, who was sitting in the baby seat. I'm sorry, he sagged guiltily. I won't do it again. Honestly. Molly left James with a truly regal look from beneath the hollow of lowered lashes and nodded graciously. All right, I forgive you. Only this will be the last time. Nancy couldn't help herself
and poked the vapors in her crumbs to evoke the swagger and demeanor of a real woman. Father James smiled with relief. Nancy noted to herself a beautiful smile and white teeth. The man was very attractive. Light, thick hair, gray eyes with long lashes, slender athletic figure which could not hide even a business suit. Lucky James's mother, to have such a husband. She, too, probably described beauty. In fact, James's father admitted, I'm still a little embarrassed. Understand me, I'm trying to raise my son to be a decent human being. But unfortunately, he and I don't get much time alone together. I'm at work. He's in the garden in the evenings. So much of it is just enough for dinner and a little reading before bed. So there are definitely some gaps in his parenting. And your wife, Nancy, couldn't resist her curiosity. She has no interest in the child's upbringing at all. Father James shook his head. She and I have been divorced for a long time. Ah, Nancy was confused. And the boy, then, lives with you? Yes, with me. She didn't want him to stay with her. My wife, actually. He hesitated, either trying to find the right word
or deciding whether Nancy was worthy of such a revelation on his part. In general, she was not much interested in the child. She was much more interested in partying, shopping, and drinking. "I'm sorry," Nancy said, confused. "I don't know what else to say." "Actually, I understand. My husband is not very attached to my daughter either, even though we are not divorced," she confessed for some reason. "So Molly spends all her free time with me." "I know you're a great mom," nodded Father James. "You know, Nancy." Perplexed, frowned Lob. "How?" "I don't think we've ever spoken to each other or known each other at all." "Not until today, but I remember you," the man smiled. "I used to watch you in group when you brought your daughter in the mornings. And you? You just didn't notice me, didn't pay any attention, nodded absent-mindedly at my hello, and walked on by." Nancy was embarrassed. "Really, I really don't remember. It was no big deal." He disarmed some more, smiled. "You must be what's my name?" "You don't know." "I don't know," she laughed. "To me, you're just Papa James. Papa James's name is Mason." "Mason is fine," he smiled, and then pointed his chin toward the kids and winked. Nancy followed the direction of his gaze and couldn't help but smile. James and Molly, having forgotten their mutual grievances, were already chatting animatedly and cheerfully with each other. "You know what?" lowering his voice, said Mason conspiratorially. "In that tone, I'll let you in on a little secret. I think my son really likes your daughter. That's why he's always picking on her and calling her names." Nancy couldn't resist a stiletto. However, Mason nodded seriously, and that is why he is still young and therefore stupid. He doesn't know how else to get the attention of a girl he likes, so he hits on her. You know, the way boys and girls usually pull pigtails. He just wants her to notice him. "Yeah," Nancy sighed. "That's not a good way to go about it. I'll be honest with you. Molly is a special, sensitive subject for our family, and teasing is not appropriate. My daughter doesn't know how to take it lightly. She has too many limitations because of it. No running with everyone, no jumping, no playing." "I understand," Mason nodded, looking at her sympathetically. "But believe me, you have an absolutely adorable little girl. I still remember her singing the Snowflake song at the New Year's Eve matinee. Tears, goosebumps. I actually almost cried." "You were at the New Year's Eve matinee." Nancy was surprised. "Oh, deep down, of course. Very flattered by his praise he confirmed. "It was fun. Only you didn't notice me, as usual. You looked at me like I was nothing." Nancy couldn't take it anymore and laughed. "Well, now I'm really embarrassed. I'm sorry, Mason. I promise not to ignore you from now on, and to always notice you." He was glowing. "That would be wonderful. By the way, are you and your daughter very busy right now?" Nancy shrugged her shoulders. "Oh, well, how can I put it? We were going to stop at the cafe and have a scoop of ice cream. Molly loves ice cream. Can James and I go too?" Looking at her, Mason asked. She was confused. "And I don't really know. I agree." "That sounds like chutzpah," he smiled. "I don't usually ask for ice cream, but James at my place really likes ice cream too. I think it would be nice for our kids to spend some more time together at the cafe. And you and I could hang out and get to know each other better." "But if our company bothers you," he added, "we won't disturb your privacy, of course." Nancy glanced thoughtfully at her daughter. She was giggling merrily and chatting with James about something. It looked like they were really having fun together. "Well, why not?" she said with a smile, turning to Mason again. "Can you keep us company?" "Wonderful." He was delighted. Where do you usually eat ice cream?" "James and I are at the Polar Bear Cafe, and it's our favorite ice cream place in town." "Excited?" Nancy exclaimed. "Wow, what a coincidence. I'm surprised we've never met there. Mason scrunched up his nose in embarrassment. Well, actually, I've seen you and your daughter there a couple times. It's just you two being your usual selves. Nancy gasped. Didn't see you? Mason nodded. That's right. Nancy pressed her palms to her willing cheeks. God, what a shame. I feel like some arrogant, narcissistic person who doesn't look around or see the people around her. He shook his head, looking at her with a warm, kind smile. You're not arrogant. It's just that you're always so absorbed in talking to your daughter that you don't notice anything or anyone around you. You really do love her very much. And Nancy felt herself blushing. The four of them had a wonderful time in the cafe. The children couldn't talk enough, sharing their impressions of their favorite cartoon characters, and the adults watched them with a smile and also occasionally exchanged phrases. It turned out that Nancy and Mason liked the same ice cream. Without conspiring, they both ordered pistachios. They had a lot in common in general. Nancy had noticed that from the first minutes of their conversation. They were what they called kindred spirits. It had been a long time since Nancy had been so relaxed and felt such ease and carefree. She even managed to forget for a while the bitter events of today. The fact that she had met her husband and his mistress in the store, that she had overheard their conversation. It all felt distant and somehow unreal. And the only reality now was the man who sat next to her at the table, smiling and catching her every word, Nancy. Or sometimes it seemed that in his eyes, in addition to friendly, clearly traced a purely masculine interest, but perhaps she was mistaken. In the first place, why would a handsome man like Mason suddenly be interested in such a wire? How's he supposed to have it? So, there's no shortage of women. As beautiful and graceful as Barbie dolls, with the figures of top models and the habits of graceful cats. And secondly, he knows she's married. Why would he go to all that trouble? She's probably just used to being admired by men, so she's mistaking a casual friendship for something more. Listen, why don't you give Molly the surgery? Mason suddenly asked. The question took Nancy by surprise and made her blush. Well, actually, we're going to. But don't you think it's a little out of your business? I'm sorry, he realized. I didn't mean to offend you at all, much less to be indelicate. I'm not just curious, I asked my best friend, who I've known since I was a kid. He's an amazing orthopedic surgeon who specializes in your problem. He has his own clinic, and if you want, I can give you the address and put in a good word. Well, he's got a year-long waiting list. But if I ask, he will move his schedule and take you out of turn, as an exception. Only it's not in Moscow. His clinic is in the Crimea, by the sea. Thank you, mumbled Nancy, stunned by such an offer. It's a flattering offer. But, you see, we were told that Molly is still too young for such operations. They say that the process is painful, long and painful. We have to wait until she's at least 7 years old. Then, of course, we will have to skip first grade, she added sadly. Or study from home. That's what we're talking about. Vovka successfully performs such operations even on very young children. He has his own innovative method. Frankly speaking, I'm not very well versed in it, but I know for sure that his clinic operates on children who are much younger than your girl, and his recovery period is much easier and faster. Nancy's eyes flashed with desperate hope. Really, that's interesting. Let me leave you his contacts, Mason immediately suggested. I'll warn Vovka that you'll call, and you can tell him more about your problem yourself. I don't know much about all these medical terms anyway. What's your profession, by the way? Nancy asked with curiosity. I'm a divorce lawyer, he said. Nancy's eyes widened. Wow, wasn't that a sign? Maybe Mason had been sent to her by fate. How could he help her? To tell her how not to give her husband a divorce. Or, on the contrary, how to get a divorce without leaving her with a bare ass. In a very eloquent silence, grinned Mason. I even wonder what you are thinking about now. Nancy did not have time to answer. At that very moment, her phone came to life and registered. Glancing at the screen, she mentally tensed. It was her husband calling. God, how could she talk to him right now? All that hesitation must have been clearly written on her face, because Mason looked at her in surprise. Recovering, Nancy grabbed the phone and answered it. "Where are you?" Charles' voice sounded harsh and disgruntled near her ear. "Yeah, Molly and I stopped by the cafe." "We're having ice cream," Nancy said quickly. And then she realized that she felt guilty. But she was not guilty of anything in front of him. Probably she had just formed a habit of behaving. Exactly. Our walking baby Charles is always making excuses. She's always making excuses. And for the record, she didn't cheat on him. He cheated on her. She felt annoyed and even irritated with her husband. Come home at once. Come home at once. He threw into the receiver, as if giving an order. Nancy noted in passing that he had said, return, not come back. Exactly. He didn't even care about Molly. What's the rush? Coldly, she inquired. Why? Charles sounded angry. Actually, we have a lot of things to do. In case you've forgotten, there's so much to do before your birthday. A mouthful of work, and she's still at the coffee shop. Am I the only one who has to deal with all the organizational issues with the party you insisted on having? Nancy clarified. If you haven't forgotten, I didn't want to celebrate so noisily at all. It was entirely your idea. You didn't even ask my opinion about it. You didn't ask me if I liked it or not. But you just sit there. You just sit there. All at home like a soul, Charles whispered, no longer hiding his disgust. Nothing interests you. You crawl into your shell like a snail. You're fixated on your child, like typical fools. I'm a mother, and you're not interested in anything but that baby. Nancy felt a bitter resentment for both herself and her daughter burn her eyes. Actually, it's not only mine, it's your child too, she said quietly. You've begun to forget that. And secondly, you yourself forbade me to work. Said that a woman's business to sit at home, cook borscht, to provide the rear, to give birth to children. Well, you haven't learned how to cook borscht or give birth to children, Charles glared. Nancy felt that this was too much. Why did she meekly, time after time, put up with this attitude and couldn't say a word in defense? Who gave him the right to talk to her like that if you keep humiliating me and Molly? I'd rather sleep in a hotel tonight than go home, she said firmly. You deal with the party tomorrow night, however you want. Charles seemed to feel that he'd overreacted. Enough of this kindergarten stuff, he said, and went home. What's a birthday without you? What's there to make up? I'm only doing this for you, to make you happy. That's a good way to make you happy, doing something Nancy hates, she thought with a chuckle. Aloud, however, she said nothing. She continued her self-loving silence. Well, Mother, I'm sorry, quickly said the husband. He hated to admit his mistakes if he was wrong, and even apologized hastily, swallowing words. Come home. By the way, did you buy a dress? Bought? Nancy said with a sigh, already realizing that she was giving up. Charles had always had a knack of bending her to his will, and all her attempts at rebellion invariably ended with everything going back to the way it was. It's a good thing you have a show. You're not waiting for me. You're waiting for us. Nancy corrected him quietly and hostilely. Actually, we're coming with your daughter. It was the only thing she had enough of. Such a ridiculous and pathetic, completely useless rebellion that Charles probably didn't even notice. As she ended the call, she suddenly encountered the attentive and sympathetic gaze of the gray eyes across the hall and mentally gasped. She had forgotten that Mason was there and was having this conversation in front of him. I wondered what he had heard and had time to realize. Nancy felt her face flush with shame. How embarrassing. You know, are you all right? Mason asked softly, not taking his inquisitive gaze from her. You looked so pale when you were on the phone. She clapped at the bitter lump in her throat. Yes, I'm fine. Thank you. Don't worry, I'm fine. Molly and I should be going now. She looked around confusedly for the waiter to ask for the bill. At that moment, Mason suddenly covered her palm with his hot, wide, strong one. Stay out of this. I'll pay the bill myself. Promise me you won't hide it if you need help, he said gravely. Nancy broke out in a new and fortunate wave. What kind of help? Any kind. Absolutely any kind. He nodded. Legal or financial or purely human. Just give me a call. I'll leave you my number too. Good. Confused, she winced, ready to fall through the ground with embarrassment. His hand still covered her arm, and it was unexpectedly nice, safe, comforting. And yet the cuts on Nancy's chair awkwardly released his palm. We really should go. Mason, thank you for your company. Call, he repeated briefly. And Vovka too. Think of your daughter and yourself. Grabbing Molly by the arm, Nancy literally dragged her behind her to the exit of the cafe. Mommy pleaded, baby girl, don't run so fast. I can't keep up with you. Nancy came to her senses and picked her daughter up in her arms. Forgive me, my darling, she whispered contritely. I promise you that very soon you will be able to run as fast as all the other children and your peers. Really? Molly was so happy. I'll be like everyone else. Suppressing convulsive sobs, Nancy gave her a quick kiss on her softly satiny cheeks. You'll be better than everyone else, she promised. Of course Charles had rejected the dress Nancy had chosen. Ha! No wonder she'd grabbed the first one in the store just to get it over with. However, Nancy liked the dress and found it even pretty, a soft, creamy shade that suited her amazingly and set off the velvet smoothness and delicate color of her skin. I asked for an evening gown, Charles whispered angrily. Black it is, then. You have no fashion sense whatsoever. You have absolutely no taste. Why black? Charles? Nancy asked calmly. Are we celebrating my birthday or someone's funeral? The funeral of our marriage, she added mentally. He just waved his hand impotently. He didn't say anything to her. They didn't have time to find and buy another dress anyway. The entire socialite Moscow was invited to this party? Nancy did not know most of those present. She had seen him for the first time in her life only on the TV screen. What am I doing here on this foreign holiday, she thought in bewilderment, accepting numerous fake congratulations from people who didn't care about her. The endless, polite smiles soon made her lips and muscles sore. Charles forbade little Molly to appear in front of the guests. Nancy, gritting her teeth, endured this humiliation. Her daughter sat upstairs in her room at a separately set small table with her nanny and the guard, and must have been desperately bored. Nancy would occasionally glance up at the stairs leading to the second floor, as if searching for her little girl, and her heart clenched with pity and guilt. She wanted to go to Molly, take her, and get the hell out of here. But she couldn't do that. She had to keep answering congratulations and smiling. And Nancy probably would have made it through the rest of the stupid party if a familiar face in the crowd hadn't caught her eye at one point. Long blonde hair, a lush shape, and a slinky dress that fit her figure like a glove. Nancy took a closer look, gasped. It was the same girl who had picked out a wedding dress with Charles the day before at his mistress's salon, and she had dared to show up at her house. Charles dragged her in. Nancy felt herself literally boiling with indignation. She began to push her way through the crowd with determination, nodding and responding to more greetings and congratulations. She needed to look this girl in the eyes and maybe scratch them out. Her husband's mistress immediately noticed her approach. Apparently, she too had been watching the party hostess from the sidelines. Watching her, and now she was waiting high on her chin for her to approach. "Good evening," Nancy greeted her coldly, and found herself very near to the beauty. She was indeed marvelously beautiful up close, even better than we had seen her from afar. "To whom do I have the honor?" "And Adriana, check that gentle voice. And you must be Nancy. Happy birthday to you. Oh, you look great for your age. What, an asshole?" She didn't miss the opportunity to tease, emphasizing that Nancy was older than her. She felt her fingers clench into fists of their own accord. "And you come to this house, and you don't even know what the landlady looks like?" Nancy asked mockingly. The pretty girl disarmed him, still slammed shut, glued to me with her eyelashes. "And I didn't come on my own. I'm here at the invitation of the host, Charles." "I'm sorry, Charles." She made a faux pas. But Nancy could have sworn she'd made the alleged disclaimer deliberately to emphasize her closeness to her found husband, her special relationship to Charles, and therefore, Nancy repeated after her, meaningfully. "But you probably don't know that Charles isn't the boss. He's just my husband. This house belongs solely to me because I inherited it from my dead parents." Adriana turned green with anger, but had no time to answer. "What's going on here?" Charles's nervous voice sounded nearby. "Nancy," she turned to her husband and gave him the most charming smile. "I'm chatting with your guest. You're the one who brought her here." "Oh, sorry, invited Adriana to this," Charles explained awkwardly. "She's my assistant, my office assistant," he added hastily. "Well, of course, in the office." Nancy nodded, wryly. "Where else? Not in bed." Charles's face twisted, an angry grimace. "What do you mean?" he whispered. "What other hints are there?" Nancy shook her head. "Come on, Charles, you know exactly what I mean. Stop playing these games." He grabbed Nancy by the elbow and dragged her away. "What did she say to you?" he asked, looking back at Adriana. "Nothing," Nancy shrugged. "But I know everything. That everything. Everything you've been trying to keep from me. Except that the secret always comes out. Haven't you heard that saying?" Realizing that Nancy was indeed aware of his relationship with Adriana, Charles realized he was backed into a corner. And that's when he decided to make the switch, finding his attention on something else. "Attention!" he exclaimed loudly, clapping his hands so that the eyes of everyone present turned to him. "My beloved wife and I have prepared a wonderful entertainment program for you, and right now you will see an amazing dance number." "What dance number?" Nancy asked quietly, sensing something bad. "What are you talking about?" Without looking at her, Charles quickly continued. "Not all of you probably know that Nancy has a daughter. An adorable little girl who just loves to dance. She's marvelous at it. And now she's going to dance just for you?" No," Nancy gasped, swiftly, paler. "You don't dare, do you hear? You don't dare do it." Charles, however, did not listen to her. Or rather, he pretended not to. "Well, what do you want to see?" "Yes," the guests roared their approval. "Let your daughter dance for us," Charles joked. Nancy tried to shout over the crowd. "Our daughter. She can't dance at all, she doesn't like it, and she's not here at all." Charles shook his head and smiled sweetly. "And she's upstairs in her room. But it's not about her now. This is going to be an unforgettable dance number, I promise." Nancy was inwardly horrified and shuddered as she realized what a monster Charles turned out to be. He was ready to put their daughter on display to make her dance with a limp leg. But why? What for? Did he hate both Nancy and Molly so much that he was willing to subject them to this humiliation? "Don't you dare!" she shouted in a full voice to Charles. "Leave Molly alone! Don't touch her!" The guests looked at her curiously, not understanding what had caused such a violent reaction. But she didn't care what they thought of her. The main thing was to keep Molly out of it. to keep her out of this nightmare. And her husband leaned over to her, and quietly so she could hear. Only she whispered, "No, dear. Now that wretched colleague you gave birth to will come out to the guests and dance some fancy dance for them. It should be great fun for everyone here. Make them happy." No, screamed Nancy, rushing at Charles and hammering her fist on his chest in despair. "You're a monster, you're an inhuman and a beast. I forbid you." "Do you hear me? And I forbid you." Charles rolled his eyes theatrically and, turning to the guests, explained guiltily. "She had a little too much to drink. It happens to her all the time. You're a liar." Nancy was already shaking with hatred and indignation.
"You're a brazen, shameless liar and manipulator. And you're a terrible mother, dear, because right now you're going to have everyone here laughing and making fun of your daughter. And there's nothing you can do to stop it.
Hey, you're just gonna watch and swallow your tears, you bitch. I hate you." Nancy drove in and, seeing that he was moving towards the stairs to the second floor, hung on him with her whole body, not allowing him to make a single step.
"You're not going anywhere. I won't let you. Stop! Don't you dare go near Molly." Tears rolled down her face, blushing red with excitement. Her face, her hair sloppily disheveled. She must have looked repulsive right now, judging by how wary and squeamish everyone present was squinting at her.
How they whispered to each other. But Nancy didn't care. All that mattered was keeping her girl safe from that monster. "Forgive my wife." Charles turned to his guests and pressed his Rancantamo's hand to his heart, playing sincerity. "She's drunk out of her mind. I was so afraid that's how it would end. I beg you to forgive her." It's not her fault, it's her misfortune. A terrible addiction she's been trying to get rid of for years. Nancy saw that everyone was looking at her husband with sympathy and at her with contempt, like some low-down drunkard. With a loud clap, she rushed up the stairs. Fortunately, Charles did not hold her back. No one stopped her at all. She flew into her daughter's room. She scared her and the nanny half to death. "Get out, please," Nancy said to the nanny. "Leave us alone. I'll take care of my daughter on my own now. Thank you." The woman obediently retreated. "Mommy, what's wrong?" The little girl asked, frightened. "Why are you crying? Did Daddy hurt you?" Hugging her baby, Nancy finally gave herself free rein and burst into tears. She was literally shaking. Charles could. Was he really capable of using his threat? Or was he just scaring Nancy like that? To distract her from thoughts of his mistress? Either way, whatever his motive, his act was repulsive. Even if he hadn't seriously intended to make Molly dance, he had made Nancy believe it. It wasn't just cruel, it was inhumane. She couldn't remember how long she'd sat like that, clutching her daughter tightly to her, afraid to let go of her for even a moment. Gradually, the murmurs of voices downstairs died down. Apparently, the guests were going home. Nancy had ruined their whole party. Her birthday party, which had been the worst birthday party of her life. Covered in her mother's arms, Molly fell asleep carefully, trying not to wake her. Nancy carried her to her crib, carefully undressed her, and covered her with a blanket. The sleeping daughter looked like an angel. One would have to have absolutely no heart to treat her the way her father treated her. Nancy realized that she could not stay in the nursery indefinitely. She needed to go out to her husband and have a frank, private conversation with him. Was he going to marry that blonde of his? What's her name, Adriana? Let him marry her. Love and advice, and Nancy would be happy to give him a divorce. Except he won't get her house or the company she inherited from her parents. Charles had been the company's manager for several years, but Nancy was still the sole owner and mistress. In fact, Charles worked for her, was her subordinate. To his credit, he kept a good eye on the company and managed everything quite intelligently. But he had been wasting his breath. There was no way in hell Nancy was going to sign over her family business to him. It'll be fine. Let him go back to Adriana the way he came to Nancy. He won't get a dime. Making sure her daughter was asleep, she tiptoed out of the room and carefully closed the door behind her. As she descended the stairs, Nancy found that the servants had almost put the house in order. It was clean and quiet after the guests, with almost nothing to remind her of the failed party. And Charles himself found himself in the dining room. He was sitting at the table with a glass of whiskey in his hand. At the sight of his wife, he looked up and grinned wickedly. And she appeared, stretched out. "Well, what have you done here today? Aren't you ashamed? No. What did you do, Charles?" Nancy interrupted him. "You know, I turned a blind eye to a lot of things. I put up with a lot of things and I voted silently. But this has gone way over the line. I want a divorce. That's fine." "So do I." Charles followed her with a glass. "I'll divorce you tomorrow?" No, tomorrow's not going to work." He frowned mockingly. "What kind of game are you playing?" Nancy, perplexed, shook her head. "There's no game. Before we get divorced, we just need to settle some paperwork formalities." "What kind of paperwork?" She didn't understand. "We'll go to a lawyer. You sign over your entire company to me, and we'll donate the house. And all free as a bird." Nancy laughed nervously. "Are you kidding me? Of course you're not getting the house or the company." "Actually, you're the one who cheated on me, Charles.
I have the right to kick your ass out." He's fake grabbing his cheeks. "Oh, me! And how rude! How uncool!" "You can't do that to me, Nancy. Not like that. Not that squinting bald ass." His gaze turned cold
And merciless as a snake's. "Or you'll be without a daughter," he said. Nancy felt like she'd been kicked in the butt. She gulped noisily for air, trying to catch her breath. "Are you out of your mind, Charles? What do you mean you're going to be without a daughter? Are you going to take her away from me?" "That's right," he nodded calmly. "I'm going to take her away." "You bet I will." Nancy staggered back, refusing to understand what was happening. "But why do you want her, Molly? You don't love her. You've never had fatherly feelings for her. But you love her," he threatened sternly. "You're crazy about that chroma legs, and if I took her away from you, you'd be in real pain." "I know I would." "So either you agree to my terms for the divorce, or you'll be without a daughter," he summarized. Nancy, not believing her ears, shook her head, bluffing. "No court will leave Molly with you. I'm her mother. She loves me. They just won't give her to you." "They won't, huh?" He mockingly introduced himself. "Why not? If I can prove that her mother is a crazy alcoholic, they'll take away your parental rights." "What?" Nancy gasped. "What am I? A psychopath and an alcoholic?" he repeated nonchalantly. "Are you delusional, Charles?" "Not at all. I have witnesses. At least 100 people have watched you throw hysterical fits today. And they'll testify in court, if necessary, that you were drunk and doing some hysterical Boilermaker thing?" "Hard to say the words?" questioned Nancy. "Yeah." Charles pulled out his phone and turned on some kind of video. Nancy saw herself frantically pounding her husband's chest with her fists in front of the guests and shouting inarticulate curses and threats. From the outside, it really could have looked like she was insane. Or drunk. This video and witness testimony will be enough to make sure you never see your girl again. Smiling at his wife with the smile of an ogre, Charles assured her. So think about it. Think, my dear, what do you value more, your daughter or your company? "You monster," Nancy whispered, looking at him with disgust. "But a very charming monster," smirked the one who will be rich as hell after the divorce. "And I'll marry my beautiful Adriana, and she'll give me a strong, healthy, perfectly normal child. Not like you can't stand to see that smug face anymore. Nancy rashly rushed out of the room. Don't forget it. Mockingly flew after her. Tomorrow, you and I are going to my lawyer, and we're going to get everything legalized. I'm so flattered, my dear, that you decided to give me your company and your house. Your generosity knows no bounds. Nancy flew into the bedroom, collapsed on the bed, and sobbed with helplessness and helplessness. She spent the night without sleep, listening feverishly to the sounds coming from downstairs. She pondered what she should do. Agreeing to Charles's terms was unthinkable. He could not take from her what she had inherited from her dead parents. Not to agree. Then he might actually take her daughter away from her. He's got a lot of connections. If he wants to prove she's crazy and an alcoholic, it won't be hard for him to prove it. Grab Molly and run. Then file for divorce online. And run where? In Moscow, and she will immediately find her. At least at acquaintances, or in a hotel. Too famous a person. When the gentle pink dawn began to dawn outside the windows. A kind of plan finally matured in her sleep-deprived head. Charles slept on the living room couch all night. As soon as Nancy came downstairs, he took offense and greeted her with snide questions. So, darling, are you ready to come with me to settle some legal formalities? Okay, coldly, she nodded. Just let's not do it in the morning, but say, during your lunch break. Right now, I need to wake Molly up, pack her up, and take her to daycare. That this can't be done by a babysitter, my husband said impatiently. I let the nanny go yesterday, Nancy shrugged. It's her day off. Let me drive to work at lunchtime, say by 1 o'clock. All right. Unhappy with the postponement, the husband apparently decided that it was better that way than nothing at all. He's stubborn. She might change her mind if he pressures her. Visit her just after 12, huh? And don't forget to bring all the deeds to the house and the company. I won't forget, Nancy sighed. Just watch me no good at all, wondered Charles, to no tricks. He quickly packed up and left for work, reminding her once again that he would be waiting for her at 12 hours. Sighing heavily again, Nancy vowed to wake her daughter. She had to hurry to get everything done in time. She was slightly shaken with excitement. First of all, she needed money, a very large sum of money. Nancy couldn't withdraw the cards because she was afraid that her husband, who monitored all her financial transactions, would immediately suspect something amiss. No, she needed cash. And Nancy knew there was plenty of it in Charles's safe in his office. Her husband never told her the code, but she never complained about her poor eyesight or memory. A couple of times when Charles had opened the safe in front of her, Nancy had managed to notice and memorize the simple combination of numbers. Now, as she entered his office, she held her breath, praying her husband hadn't changed the code. 198. A click and the door opened. Nancy saw a weighty wad of $5,000 bills, neatly tugged and rubber banded by her travel bag. Nancy began hastily shoveling the money out of the safe, wad by wad. When the safe was empty, she slammed the door shut and with a shaky watch rushed to pack for her and Molly. Then she woke her daughter, bathed her, dressed her, and drove to daycare. She needed to put her husband's guard down, and it was as if he sensed something. As soon as Nancy and Molly stepped into the daycare center, Charles immediately called her. "Where are you?" he asked her demandingly, trying to keep his voice calm. Nancy answered, "We just got here. Molly got up today, barely able to get angry. We were almost late. Send me a picture of you. And that limp leg." Charles demanded it. "Why?" Nancy was surprised. "So I can see that you're really in the garden with her now?" he bellowed. "I told you no tricks." "What tricks, Charles?" Nancy sighed and then cradled her daughter in her arms, took her hand with the phone aside, and took their selfies together in front of her daughter, on a locker with a brightly colored umbrella on the door. After sending the photo to her husband, she added a message. "So now you've made sure we're really in the garden, Molly and the band." Offended, he replied, "I'll see you at lunchtime." And now, when Charles was sure that he had the location of his wife and daughter under control, Nancy called the teacher to him. She quickly, literally in a few sentences, outlined the situation to her, and then carefully transferred to her blouse pocket one chowder, a wad of $5,000 bills. This instantly settled the matter. The kindergarten teacher immediately ran off to get Molly another personal file. She brought her medical records, too. And remember, Molly Viktorovna, Nancy admonished her, "You have nothing to do with it. You saw nothing, heard nothing, know nothing. You can even say that I simply stole my daughter's card from you. Stole it when you were out of the group for a minute, and then snatched it off the street while you were walking? Good luck to you, Nancy," the teacher sighed, and then stroked the girl's head. "I'm going to miss you so much, Molly." And now, walking out of the kindergarten, holding her daughter's hand, Nancy finally realized that there was no turning back. Her knees were shaking finally with fear. "Nancy!" She heard a man's voice above her ear and almost screamed in terror. She realized quickly, however, that the voice was not Charles's. Turning around quickly, she saw Mason, who was holding James's hand. Apparently, he was here too. He had just brought his son to the garden. "Hello, Mason!" She exhaled. "You're all right. You look like you're being chased by wolves." Nancy grinned wryly. "To be honest, I kinda do." "I can help you too," the man offered readily. "You can?" Nancy nodded decisively. "Could you take Jamis to the group and then drive me and Molly to the airport?" "I'll pay for the gas, of course," she added. "Of course you will," he agreed happily and didn't stammer about paying. "Huh? Did your car break down?" Nancy shook her head. "No, I just don't want anyone to be able to track me down from my car." Mason frowned worriedly. "Are you in trouble?" Nancy shrugged. "I don't know if I'm already in trouble or if I'm just about to get into it. But I'll tell you one thing, I can't stay in town anymore." After listening to her confused explanation, he nodded gravely. "All right, I'll take you wherever you say. But on the way." "On the way? Promise to tell me everything." "I promise." Nancy nodded. 6 months later, Molly's mom had climbed out of the water and was now running toward Nancy, right across the sand, laughing merrily and waving her palm. "Can I swim a little more? Oh, please, I haven't had a swim yet." Nancy felt her heart habitually tickle. She still couldn't get used to her baby walking, running, jumping. Just like all the other healthy children in the temple, that one disappeared without a trace. And it was all thanks to Jacob, as Mason Friendly called him. He was a doctor from God. It was to his clinic, located in the Crimea on the seashore, that Nancy and Molly had gone on the very day when they had hurriedly fled Moscow, 6 months ago, running away from Charles. Nancy had thought out this plan in advance. She knew that her husband would not look for her in the Crimea. He just wouldn't realize it. She called Jacob, introduced herself as an acquaintance of Mason, and asked if she and her daughter could come to his clinic for surgery. And the name of an old friend was the best recommendation. The doctor agreed to admit them as soon as they arrived on site. And then things started to turn around.
First, she emptied the home safe, then she drove to the daycare center to pick up her daughter's papers. And then she met Mason, who kindly agreed to give her and Molly a ride to the airport. On the way, she told him everything without a word. For some reason, it seemed that this reliable, calm, and reasonable man could be trusted. When Mason found out she was running away from her husband, he became agitated. "Why didn't you come to me at once for help?" he exclaimed with annoyance.
I told you that I am a divorce lawyer. I wouldn't let that scoundrel threaten and blackmail you. I assure you, your case is not that complicated. I'd win it in a heartbeat. Your husband is just intimidating you, taking advantage of your inexperience. The truth is not on his side, and even a single video of you allegedly being intoxicated means nothing. Thank you, Mason. She nodded. Yay, you're right. I was just scared. But it's for the best, right? My daughter and I will go to the clinic to see your friend. Does she need the surgery? I really hope so. And that there's nothing my husband can do while I'm gone. As soon as Molly's settled, I'll get to work on the divorce. Okay, Mason nodded. But promise me that you will bring the matter to my attention. I promise. Nancy smiled. But on the way, let's stop at a lab and have your blood drawn. Why? She was surprised. You said that yesterday during the birthday party where your husband accused you of being an alcoholic. But you didn't drink at all. I didn't drink a drop. I swore to Nancy. He's the one who made me drunk because I started yelling and throwing myself at him. Oh, great. Now we're going to do a rapid test that will show that you have no alcohol in your blood. This paper will then serve as your best defense in court. And if you had really been drinking the night before, the test will definitely show that. Jesus, Nancy gasped. Why didn't I think of that? That's what lawyers are for. Mason winked at her. To think for you and solve all your problems. He did take care of all the problems associated with the divorce proceedings. Charles, realizing that his wife had run away with their daughter, was tearing up, especially because he couldn't find her. It was impossible to declare her wanted, because Nancy regularly contacted acquaintances and assured that she was fine, just does not want to return home yet. But where she was, no living soul knew, except Mason and Jacob. Meanwhile, her husband's mistress had lost patience. After all, he had promised her that he would soon take possession of the house and his wife's company, divorce her, and marry her to Adriana. And in the end, only stalled time, coming up with more and more excuses. Eventually, the girl herself left him, and she went to a more promising view. Charles tried to contact Nancy through a lawyer to ask her to return to him, forget old offenses, and start all over again. He assured her that the affair with Adriana had been a temporary mistake, a lapse of judgment, and that he had never really loved anyone but Nancy. He even promised that he would reconsider his attitude to little Molly, would love her and take care of her as a father should. However, Nancy did not fall for these sweet guest speeches. Already 2 months later, she became the happy owner of a certificate of divorce. In the meantime, the daughters had several operations, one after the other. At first, she could move only with crutches, but then gradually she got better and better, more and more confidently, and confidently kept on her feet. When the girl walked with a steady step for the first time, albeit slowly and timidly, but no longer limping or falling sideways, Nancy could not hold back happy tears. At last, it was time to return to Moscow. Nancy had already delayed welcome back. She and Molly continued to live in Crimea, because her daughter liked very much the beautiful southern nature, warm tender sea, tasty fruits. But still, their home was there. In Moscow, Nancy had to get Molly into the first grade and get in charge of her company. Charles she had long ago dismissed as manager, and now she was no longer going to entrust this mission to outsiders. She wanted to run the business herself. "Do you miss home?" Nancy asked Molly. The other one laughs. Marcello's knows. "I miss it, but I'll miss the sea too. Why can't you take the sea with you to Moscow?" Nancy smiled. "We'd better agree that we'll come here every summer. Maybe we'll even buy a little house here." Hurrah! 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 Cheered for. Molly jumped around her.
And Nancy again mentally praised Jacob for his golden hands thanks to which her daughter was now jumping around her like a quick monkey.
So can I swim a little more?
Please, Molly asked, but Nancy glanced at his watch and frowned worriedly.
No, honey. We have to hurry if we don't want to miss our plane. She wiped her daughter dry with a towel, and they walked hand in hand toward the beach exit. Nancy didn't realize she'd run into a man, literally slamming into his chest.
Sorry, she mumbled. And then she heard a familiar, cheerful voice. She heard it and couldn't believe her own ears. And me, Nancy, you're developing my heart. Once again, you've overlooked me and failed to recognize me. Mason! She gasped. Good heavens, Mason, what are you doing here? And I'm not alone, by the way. He nodded to his back, and Nancy found his son James standing there. Molly exclaimed in delight. The boy smiled and immediately rushed over to her. Oh my God, what a surprise. Nancy pressed her palms to her cheeks. Why didn't you tell me you were coming? It was to be a surprise. Mason smiled, looking at her fondly. Nancy, I've missed you terribly, and you're even more beautiful than before. You say too, she muttered embarrassedly. It's the sea climate. He shook his head. No, it's happiness. It suits you very well. Literally transformed. You're not the poisoned children of fear that you used to be, are you? And a lot of that is thanks to you, Nancy nodded. And your friend Jacob. Of course, what he did to my daughter, I can't call anything short of a miracle. Mason shifted his gaze to Molly, who, holding cheerfully, was racing James. I see Molly is doing just fine, he smiled. You know, deep down, James wished that she didn't have a limp anymore. Why is that? Nancy frowned. Did he enjoy teasing her so much? No, that wasn't why. Mason shook his head. He'd confessed to me once that he'd dreamed of spending his life protecting Molly and, if necessary, carrying her in his arms. That's how Nancy grinned, immediately defending the knighthood. By the way, Mason lowered his voice, that's my great wish too. What is? She didn't understand defending you, Nancy.
And to carry you in my arms for the rest of your life. She poured with paint. What do you mean? You still haven't figured it out. I've been in love with you for a long time, but you never noticed. I didn't dare talk about my feelings when you were legally married, but now I can start courting you like a man, courting the woman he loves. Mason looked at her pleadingly, searching, anxious. And it was obvious that this strong, handsome, usually confident man was terribly afraid of rejection. Nancy, for her part, looked at Mason, who had done more for her than any man had ever done in his life. And she realized that his happiness was now entirely in her hands. And his future depended on her answer, no more, no less. May I? He asked shyly, not taking his eyes off her. Nancy shook her head slowly. No. Did his face change? No. Not can, but must. She laughed and threw herself around his neck. Happy and broken, Mason barely had time to open his arms. And now, their lips were kissing. It doesn't work like that. Oh, the pounding in Nancy's temples made it seem so perfect. My daughter is completely healthy, and this man is the most beautiful man in the world, confessing his love to me. It happens, Mason said quietly. And Nancy realized she hadn't just thought it. She'd said it out loud because her happiness didn't want to hide anymore. It wanted the whole world to know and hear about it,